You're the video editor.
I know, but I don't edit my own face and my own voice. What's up? Today I'm gonna do some Okay. Hey guys. Hey everybody. Hey everybody. So today I'm gonna show you some basics on how to color grade your EVO footage. On here. Hey guys, it's me, Greg. You might know me from such films as
Soft Sticks,
EVO, Groove, and vlog number 2, Flight Maneuvers, where I was walking down a bridge. Okay. So color grading drone footage can be a little bit trickier than color grading some other footage just because the size of sensors on drones and things like that. So that's why I want to show you a tutorial on how to make the most out of your EVO footage. We just released a LUT pack. I'll have a link in the description down below so you can try out some LUTs that we've been making in-house, and hopefully that'll help you get started on your color grading. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I'm gonna be doing this color grading in Adobe Premiere CC. The LUTs that we've created are cube files, so they should work with Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, Adobe CC, maybe some other obscure editing softwares, I don't know, but they work with the major 3. So first things first is I'm gonna open up Premiere and start a new project, assuming that my computer wants to open Premiere. If you guys want a little intro to editing in general, then let us know, we can get into that, but this is under the assumption that you already know some of the basics with using a nonlinear editing system. So we're just gonna jump right into it. So I'm gonna start a new project in Premiere. Let's call it color grading test. That sounds good. I have this really cool folder called LUTs, full of LUTs. Color test. Cool. I'm gonna import just an array of EVO footage, and all the footage today that I'll be working with was shot in log. We try to shoot log just because it's gonna give you a lot more data to work with when you're in post. So if you're shooting in .log color profile at H.265 with 10-bit recording, you're gonna get a lot more play out of the colors when you go into try to create some moods out of your footage. So I have all my footage here just laying in the media bin. I'm not gonna get into how I actually would organize and do a full-on edit just because this is gonna be focused on color stuff. First thing I like to do is interpret all the footage from 60 to 24, well 23.976 to be specific. And then for now, I'm just gonna drag all that onto the timeline. So here's a bunch of footage. It is log, so the color profile is pretty flat, generally speaking. If you're not familiar with LUTs, I'm gonna show you real quick a couple different ways to bring LUTs into your project. LUT stands for lookup table. It's kind of like a preset for color settings in a nonlinear editing system, just like you'd have a preset in Lightroom. So if you go into Lumetri Color tab right here, if it's not already opened, you can go into Windows, Lumetri Color, there it is. Under the Creative tab, right here, under Look, you can browse, and when you browse, you can go find your LUT from there and import it, and that will import it as a one-time thing. I prefer to have everything in there all the time. So for Premiere, in order to do that, you have to go find Premiere and Finder, Premiere Pro, right-click, show package contents, and then go into Lumetri, where you'll go under the Looks folder, Creative, and then add the LUTs in there. These are a bunch of cubes that I already have. Cubes are the file extension for LUTs, but I don't have our new EVO ones in here yet, so I'm gonna add those. So here are the 8 new EVO LUTs, and I'm gonna copy them into there. Cool, so now all the LUTs are inside of the package contents of Adobe Premiere. So every time you open Adobe, they'll show up under here as opposed to having to import them every time. Although when you do that, because Adobe is kind of silly, you have to reopen it the first time you import, which I don't think you have to do for DaVinci. And I don't know anything about Final Cut because I stopped using Final Cut after Final Cut 10 came out. Because Final Cut 7 was sick and Final Cut 10 was stupid. Final Cut 10 is great. It's a wonderful tool. I just don't like magnetic timelines. Okay, so now that I reopened it with those imported into the Finder section, if we go under Lumetri Color to Creative, they're gonna all show up under EVO log 1 through 8. So keep in mind that LUTs are just a starting point. They're just a reference to a look and a feel. They're not going to be our end result. So this shot has a lot of different blues and greens in it, and some warmer orange tones in there as well, some orange and teal happening. So I think it's a good shot to play around with as an example. Just as a reminder, shoot with the locked white balance so that your color temperature doesn't shift in the middle of a shot. So we go into Kelvin temperature and set that for our flight. That way you're not getting any color shifts in the middle of your shot just based on an auto white balance setting or something like that. So if you go down here under the creative tab of Lumetri and go under looks, we have our EVO log presets that are in here. And I'm just gonna shuffle through them, try to find one that's close to what I'm looking for, and then from that point on, we'll modify from there. So starting off with look number 1, that is not what I had in mind. Is really warm. It would probably work for, I don't know, like a desert shot maybe, but not what I'm looking for this beautiful tropical blue thing. So you can go back down and click from here, or in Premiere, a nice little trick in order to make it faster is you can just use the scroll wheel on your mouse. So I'm just gonna scroll through on this bar right here. Our LUT number 2 treats this shot pretty well. As a starting point, it's bringing in the right colors that I want. The exposure is not looking too bad. The shadows look pretty good, so that's an option. Log 3 is kind of similar, but a lot brighter. The shadows are not where I'd like them, but again, this is just a starting point. Log 4, no. 5, no. 6. I'm gonna start with that log number 2 and go from there. So find one that's closest to what you're looking for, and then the next thing I like to do is go into my curves. I like to pull up my RGB parade as a way to see what's going on. So if you go under Window, Lumetri Scopes, and click on that. So then if you go down here to this little wrench icon, click on that, you can go to Parade RGB, which is my personal favorite one to use, and it'll be this right here. And then go down to the icon again, and get rid of those waveforms. You can use those if you like. I just prefer RGB. And what this is it's gonna show the shadows down here. 0 is clipping to where there's no more data in the blacks. And then highlights are up here to where this 100 mark right here is gonna be where you have no more data in the highlights. So normally I'll be having this parade in a separate window on a second display because I edit with 2 monitors generally. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to move this window down into this area, and I'll have that right down there so I can still see what I'm doing. And then you'll see as I move these points, all this information down here is going to change, and it's going to change the overall exposure of the shot. So my main goal with this is to stretch out the shadows and the highlights to really spread out the parade and get the most information out of there that we can. And generally speaking, you'll do that with an S curve. So if you see this curve right here, it's kind of in the shape of an S a little bit. This one isn't as drastic as some might end up being. So one other thing is that when I'm modifying these curves right here, I'm doing that to the base shot, not to the LUT. So if you go into this creative tab where I added our EVO log LUT, all of these settings under the creative, the vibrancy, saturation, the highlight, shadow, tint, and the intensity, all that is affecting the LUT layer that we put on the shot, and all these other tabs are affecting the original shot that came out of the EVO. So with these curve adjustments and kind of bringing out the scopes of this, it's going to make your image look more technically correct. So it's important to get to this starting point, especially if you're grading multiple shots from the same day, but the lighting might be different, or you have broad light versus short light, that kind of stuff. For instance, if we were to be shooting this same shot on the other side of this island, we'd have a bunch of broad light from that sun. So when you're creating a cut, you want your color to match. Otherwise, it kind of can bring the viewer out of the experience. You want to have the color be consistent and create a mood throughout the whole entire piece. So a good way to make sure that you're doing that is to look at these scopes and see that, technically speaking, and to the human eye, it looks like the same environment. And then from there, once you have that set, you can go on and go into some more creative stuff if you want to mess with your hue and luma and all those kinds of things, which we can go down here to look into. So once you have that base set, if you wanted to bring down a specific tone or bring up a specific tone, then that's where you would do it, is in these curves down here. So hue versus saturation, it's going to change the saturation of a specific tone or hue in the shot. So if you take this color picker and say you want to get down here in the sand, pick that and then bring that down, and you can see that it's just desaturating that sand versus bringing it up, which is going to saturate it. And you can do those kinds of things once you get a base image to start from, and then really let your creativity shine through in terms of trying to set moods and things like that. Another way to do that is to change the hue of it. So if we go down to that same sand and change it from, it's a little bit of a green hue, if we made it more of a yellow, you can do that, or you could go crazy and make it look disgusting like that. But it just gives you a lot to play with if you use these color curves. I'm a big fan of them. I believe DaVinci has something that's comparable, and FCP does as well. So one more handy tool to use is a vector scope. So down here on this wrench icon under your Lumetri scopes panel, you can go to vector scope HLS, and that's going to pull up this color wheel right here. And in this, it's showing you the saturation based on that hue. So the farther out this white goes, the more saturated that color is. So right now we're pretty saturated in the oranges and down here in the blue. And then as you change stuff, so if we go down here to these hue versus saturation and hue versus hue, all this kind of stuff we were just looking at, and modify this, you'll see a live change down here in the scope. So if you're going all the way to the edge, that means you're clipping. You don't want to clip your saturation. I mean, I guess it's personal preference, but you shouldn't, because it'll be ugly. So using a combination of these two scopes makes it a lot easier to make sure that your exposure, as well as your hue and your color and your saturation, all that kind of stuff, is uniform across your clips to make sure that your stuff technically looks good, in addition to looking cohesive to the human eye. I always like to do a combination. I don't usually grade just based on scopes, because I mean, I have certain preferences just based on what I see and the things that I feel based on those colors and those tones and that mood that sets. So I definitely do a hybrid of what it says technically in these scopes versus what I see and what I feel. So I'm liking the way that this shot's looking right now. If I go over here to effect controls, then I can toggle on and off the Lumetri color, so you can see the log unedited versus after some color work. So I'm gonna find another shot really quick just to show you another test. This is shot also in log H265, and we're gonna go into Lumetri color again, go down to the creative tab and see what the LUTs look like off the bat. So EVO log number 1, and that is really green. but that wouldn't be a horrible place to start from, but it's not what I'm looking for. So again, you can scroll through these looks. EVO 2, that's what we used last time with the Philippines shot. 3, I kind of actually like the teal that's popping up in that one. That one's not bad either. That one's very high contrast if we were going for something really moody, and actually wouldn't be a terrible place to start depending on what you're going for. Same with that one, actually. I kind of like that. 7 and 8. I'm actually going to go with this super dramatic one and see what happens. So this is going to be my starting point, which is a pretty drastic change from the log footage. But if you go down here to the intensity of the LUT, again, you can bring that down. So I'm just going to bring down the intensity of the LUT a little bit, just because it's such a big shift. And then get started with my curves. So looking down here again at this RGB parade, my parade is down in the blacks and then a little bit in the mids, but nothing up here really. So I'm gonna take my curves and try to just broaden out the look of that. I'm doing this while focusing on the scope. I'm not really looking at the image at all. I'll do that afterward to kind of compare it with my eye. So it's looking better on the scopes. It's looking a little bit high contrast in the image for my personal taste, so I'm going to bring down the mids a little bit. Somewhere in that range. You can see that it's pretty focused on orange and teal. There's not much magenta or green happening. Generally that's considered a cinematic look. Skin tones are more of an orange. The complementary color to orange is teal, so that's a pretty timeless and standard look to go for. So again, if you go up, the tabs that are not the creative tab are adjusting the original shot as opposed to the LUT. So I'm going to go up to the basic correction tab, which is where you would do some basic preliminary color correcting as opposed to grading, and just bring down the highlights a little bit and bring up the shadows, and that's going to adjust the original shot, not the LUT that we added. One more thing I like to do is to bring out some of the saturation in the shadows and the highlights. An easy way of doing that would be go down to curves and then go to this saturation versus luma down here, and this is going to be your high ends and your low ends, and if you just bring down some of the saturation in the shadows and the highlights, and this will make your shots look a lot more realistic. The human eye doesn't see a lot of color in shadows and highlights. That's projected through the color grading process, so removing those will make it feel a lot more realistic and just look a lot more polished, less like a filter per se and more like a cinematic shot. So once again, I'm going to go over here to the Lumetri color tab and just do a before and after for you, just to kind of show what that look looks like. And again, this could have gone a myriad of ways depending on which LUT I started with, which is a great thing about log color profile, is that I could have turned this into a different mood depending on how I grade it. So there's a big difference, obviously. When you shoot log, you want to shoot with the intention of doing some color grading. We would not recommend shooting log if you do not plan on working in post. The point of log profile is to hold that data and be able to create moods and tones from that. There'll be a link in the description below where you can download these LUTs for free from our website. We made them specifically for EVO log footage, and they're just going to be a great little starting point for you to explore color grading, to create those kinds of moods and to create a cinematic look. I'm going to go ahead and finish grading the rest of this timeline. I'll throw that up into a little edit and show you guys here in a second. Remember to subscribe and follow us on our social media channels and that kind of stuff. And we'll see you next week. Probably. Cut.